Hi, we're back. In our last talk, we were discussing the labor theory of value. Now, the labor theory of value is the idea that value is created through labor. Think of a rainforest. The rainforest by itself does nothing. It's calm, it's beautiful, and it's green. But does it produce any wealth? If we cut the rainforest into logs, then we can sell the logs. So the logs are wealth. By cutting down the rainforest, we've created wealth. Now, this sort of idea corresponds to what we can call the paradigm of exploitation. What we're saying here is that by investing more labor into something, it becomes valuable. Now, in the ancient Sanskrit, the word karma means labor. So what we're really talking about here is how to create a karmic theory of value. We could say that karma creates all wealth. Now, in the modern era, this kind of conclusion has flowed through the sort of economics promoted by Adam Smith and later Karl Marx. And we see the scientific method that begins with observation and moves through developing a question, researching something, having a hypothesis about it, experimenting, and creating some data, is used to promote the labor theory of value. That is to say that science is useful when it's practical. Now, the idea that science is useful when it's practical originates with this man. His name was Auguste Comte. And his point was real research, real knowledge should lead to some kind of practical result. And that practical result, that positive result, will be used in the service of humanity. And other sorts of conclusions are not useful and they're not practical. So, since the time of Auguste Comte, these ideas about the practicality of science have been embedded in what we can identify as an ideology of science. What I'm trying to say here is that science itself appears to be based on the scientific method. It appears that we're following a very practical system. We're beginning with observation. We make questions. We have a hypothesis. We create experiments to test the hypothesis, and we have a conclusion. But in point of fact, this scientific method embeds an ideology. And this idea that science promotes an ideology has been taken up by a man named Rupert Sheldrake. And he points out that for more than 200 years, materialists have promised that science will eventually explain everything in terms of physics and chemistry. Believers are sustained by the faith that scientific discoveries will justify their beliefs. And he breaks down the beliefs of these scientists into 10 important beliefs, which he calls the creed, the scientific creed. So just as worshippers of Jesus Christ in the Catholic Church have the Apostolic Creed, the scientists have their creed, And according to Mr. Sheldrake, these are the 10 core beliefs that most scientists take for granted. Scientists believe that everything is essentially mechanical. Dogs, for example, are complex mechanisms. All matter is unconscious, and the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. The laws of nature are fixed. They're the same today as they were at the beginning of the creation, and they will stay the same forever. Now, there's no way to prove these contentions, and that's why they're beliefs. But one who does not subscribe to these beliefs is considered to be a heretic and will be driven out by the scientific community, as Mr. Sheldrake himself was not allowed to continue his scientific career, and his famous TED Talk was banned. Sheldrake shows that contemporary science is based on the claim that all reality is material or physical, and there is no reality but material reality. Consciousness is a byproduct of the physical activity of the brain. Well, none of these ideas can be proven. Now, you would think that science involves being able to prove something, but in point of fact, these are assumptions, and they revolve around certain core beliefs. They say that we can study only what we can measure. If you can't measure it, it can't be studied, and if it can't be studied or measured, it's not worth asking about. So this is kind of interesting because it avoids the whole question of meaning. Now, scientists, they pitch themselves as being interested in the big questions. They say that they're going to solve the secrets of the universe, but are they really? In point of fact, scientists are not interested in solving the secrets of the universe because they don't consider that these questions are worth asking. They're not practical questions, they're not useful questions, and therefore they cannot be asked. But by prohibiting questions about meaning, what the scientists are doing is they're creating taboos. Now, it sounds strange for me to talk about the scientists in this way, but the scientific community has affected the philosophical community. As Stephen Hawking has pointed out, he says that philosophy is now dead. Why? Because the questions that people found interesting in philosophy have been taken up by science, and science has produced some pretty cool technology. And as a consequence, we're not interested in philosophical questions anymore. Those philosophical questions which may be deferred to theologians are discussed by theologians in quiet circles in academia and in the church, but churchgoers are not really interested in philosophical questions. They want their babies baptized, they want their marriages, they want their funeral rites, and they want comfort in times of need. But to really delve into the issues of consciousness, where the universe comes from, what's the purpose of human life, we've deferred that too long to the philosophers. The philosophers have deferred that too long to the scientists. And the scientists have told us, actually, these questions are not important. Why? Because we can study only what we can measure. We can study the physical world, we can study observable behavior, and we can't investigate what cannot be precisely measured. In terms of consciousness, we can look at that as a phenomenon. So, for example, say I have a phenomenon in front of me. I have some cards. I can study these cards from a phenomenological point of view. That is to say, I can see they're made out of paper. They measure 2.5 inches by 3 inches. And they have two sides. One side has some colors. I can do a spectrographic analysis of the colors. But this tells us nothing about what the cards mean. So take a game of poker. If you're a phenomenologist and you study the game of poker, what you look at is the cards. What are they made of? They're made of paper. They have a printed design. There are so many molecules on each side. And we can describe with great accuracy the different face cards, the marking on each card, the color, size, shape, texture, and so on. And you can experience, you can have a personal experience of what each card is. You can say it's so long, it's so wide, it has a certain extension. But you'll never understand that the people who are involved in the poker game are staking their lives. They're spending a lot of money. They're risking their life savings on the outcome of the game. But the game follows rules, it has a strategy, it has a purpose, and it has a meaning. To entirely focus on the surface of the card is to completely miss the meaning of the game. So the inner rules of the game are invisible to the phenomenologist who's merely looking at the structure of the cards. And so in this way, the real meaning is lost. Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, these men they're not concerned with meaning because they have a firm belief that meaning does not exist. They feel that it is a violence to consider that God exists and that faith in God does violence to science.